questions and answers. There's a couple of you that brought some pictures that might help describe some of the things they're doing. So we'll try to, we can use the call on those if we need to. But any questions that you have, be thinking of those, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions from you all to these folks. So I'm going to start at this end with Rodney Rulon from Arcadia is what I would say. Is that your actual address? There's all those little towns over there in northern Hamilton County, but I'll turn it over to Rodney and he'll brief you on their operation.
All right, I am Rodney Rulon, part of a little bit of this good ground here in Tipton, quite a bit of the slightly more droppy ground down there in Hamilton County. So there's actually a whole group of us. I'll just say real quick, most of you know Jerry, Rulon, Ken, and Roy are all around here. We all farm together. They're the ones that make sure you get the work done so I can go around with this kind of thing and be at these meetings. So it's been a lot this last week. So anyway, we're going on 20 years now of no-till. Started in 92 with no-till and everything. Covered crops for about the last 7 or 8 years since we started testing them on a small scale and getting them on about half the acres at this point. Seen a lot of soil quality improvements. We got hog operation, around some acres, things like that. Just general, still trying to figure it out. So that's where we're at.
I'm Dave Chance, and I live actually northeast Boone County, just north of a little town called Elizaville, and just south of a town called Kirkland. And I farm with my wife there. We have a grain and a small fair to finish hog operation. And I'm relatively new at the whole no-till concept. We've been working with this, playing with it here for 4 or 5 years. Have been experimenting with cover crops since '96, and in the last 3 years have implemented that on a whole farm basis. And I'll pass the mic on down.
My name is Todd Redlin from Northwest Indiana. I live in Rensselaer. I started farming in Wells County, Eastern Indiana in 1997 in a Rawson vertical zone till system with cover crops. I had an opportunity to move home and farm in a family operation, and we were no-tillers. Currently, I work for Fratco, the tile company in Francisville. Sometimes I cross paths with a lot of people out here to see you around at meetings. I still farm about 300 acres part-time. My mom's farm at Bass Lake, Indiana is sand. But it's not seen black smoke and shiny iron since 1988. And last year, irrigated corn on corn put most conventional tillage yields to shame. So got reintroduced to cover crops. A friend of mine also works for Fratco, Chris News. We started playing with some cover crops a couple of years ago, and we're still trying to figure out what system we like, but we're refining that every year.
Mike Shooter from Madison County, Franklin area. Farm with 2 sons, one full-time, one part-time. We started no-tilling corn back in '83, the year of the pick here, which several of us remember that year. Started strip-tilling corn then about 9-10 years ago. We've been strip-tilling corn and tilling soybeans for that length of time. We've been corn head. And to us, that's the residue management is the beginning of where we have to start. I mean, we start, you've got a whole system here that you have to develop, and it starts with residue management. Here you are. We're strip tilling everything that we're going to corn with, and but getting the chemistry right, the year you're going to start in the cover crops is really something that you have to look at. If you're going to have something like crimson clover and radishes in the program, which we do have, we have to stay away from stuff like atrazine and glycerin. And we've gone to some actress and BASF products with verdicts and using sharpening system when you're burning down the cover crops is one piece sharpened on top of the Power Max or glyphosate. Really heats that stuff up. There's some additives that we're using, the citric acid, there's AMS, and the sharpened product needs methylated acetyl on it. So that whole package is good. So we've got a cocktail mix that we use depending on the lot. We've got a cocktail for first-year corn and for second-year corn. Because for first-year corn, we're going to be putting radishes and clover down in that corn crop this fall. And so we can't keep the glycerin and the atrazines out of there. But on second-year corn is where we can put glycerin in there because we want the seed cereal rye ahead of the soybean crop for that third crop in application. So I hate not being able to use glycerin because it's done us a great job on giant rags and all those things. And so being able to keep it in the system with 2 years of corn, a year of beans is really where we like to be. Using the Pursuit product, our Optil Pro is probably where we're going with what we'll burn down the cover crop with in the spring, putting a bean crop into it, and that gives us some Pursuit in the system, and then we can come back. We've actually gone to Liberty Beans this time on everything, and that breaks the chemistry cycle again on just all glyphosate. So this is the first year we want to run Liberty Beans. We've got a few, I saw yesterday, we need to respray again, but that's a system that we're gradually headed with.
Right? Sounds like pre-planning is real important too, having a plan ahead of time.
We spent most of the last winter making sure we had things right before we even ordered cover crop seeds.
What's management-wise, you're starting into this system, what would you advise the first thing?
In our area, it's drainage. And do I cell tile? Yeah, but my background.
It was so hard for me to predict.
Yeah. My background in '97 when I started farming, I also had the opportunity to get started with farm drainage, doing some excavating. And one thing I'd mention is we were in a vertical tillage system, and we started systematically draining. We had soil types over there that were silty clay. And I don't know that it gets much tighter than that. We were draining them on 30 and 40-foot centers, and what we found was all of our surface drains that were a maintenance nightmare going into the ditch. You always had, every spring you had the backhoe or the excavator on a really bad one, where you were dipping silt out of the ditch because you had one blowout, you blew a ditch bank out, or you had problems. When we started systematically draining fields, our need over there for surface drains went to nil. I mean, we actually, you'd have to take a weed eater and knock the foxtail down in front of them because you just didn't have any water, you didn't have the erosion, the surface water. The water was going down, it's percolating into the ground like it should. I would agree, I terms of biotechnology. I was a popcorn grower for a lot of years. Last year was the first year I raised Roundup corn ever. I mean, I've always been a popcorn soybean guy. So I've got a lot, my learning curve is going to be steep, and I've seen that this year in combating volunteer corn. And but the pre-planting, what I found is where I have good drainage, I don't have near the weed issues, I don't have the compaction issues, and it makes the transition into a no-till cover crop. It has for me. It's made that transition a lot easier.
Dave, you've been on a road to this system for a while. Very systematically, starting step by step. So what's been? Tell us about that.
Actually, I've got some of that in my slides. I can just show that right now. As far as what, but I'll echo what Todd basically said. When I first started grain farming in '97, I was very conventionally minded. You know, you saw the crops that looked really good, and they were from conventional tillage systems. And you know, fluffing that soil, having it looking like a garden. You know, I really thought that was the answer. And our soils are basically kind of a Brookston, Crosby, Miami type of mixture. So we have a lot of tight clays, and we had a lot of drainage issues within our soils. So we did that whole conventional thing for a while and realized that our soils really weren't getting better. It was taking more power to pull through them. They were still wet. They would crust. They were compacting. And we had some neighbors down the road there, two brothers and a dad run a large grain operation. And back in the mid-'90s, they were system tiling on a regular basis with a budget. And I got to observing how their crops looked and somewhat the resilience of the crops that they were raising. Their fields were draining evenly. They were getting in the field sometimes 2, 3, 4 days earlier than what we were, and they had really even, nice stands. So we started system drainage back in 1994, and I would say within that process, that would have been the first step probably in going to a more no-till system. And then we really feel like there's about a 3-step approach to that. And this might get a little controversial. We really feel like the next tool that you need to have in your toolbox is a Dickie John compaction tester, and you need to have a shovel and a good pocket knife, okay? And because our soils have been tilled for so many years and we have been in a monoculture system, just corn, beans, or continuous corn, or whatever, we have not had the diversity in those soils, there are a lot of compaction layers within those soils. And I think it's very important, at least in our neck of the woods, to know where those compaction layers are at. So have a shovel, dig down, find where those layers are at, using a pocket knife, using a penetrometer, whatever it takes to identify that. And then we like to use, as a second step, a no-till inline ripper. We've got a DMI 2500 ripper that has basically a straight leg on it with a straight 2-inch point. We can operate that anywhere from probably 9 to up to 18 inches. We like to get about 2 inches under a compaction layer, and we like to basically get that compaction out because a root needs to have the ability to go straight down without resistance. And after we kind of have found that system, we kind of feel like that's sort of the second leg, and I guess the third leg, which might be a little controversial. It's very important to know where your soil tests are at, and I've worked with Luke Lightfoot over here. Many of you know Luke, and Jerry Batts from Hill Alliance work very closely with these guys and mineral balances and getting them corrected. And we will still use some mulch tilling incorporated. At that point then, we feel like we are preparing ourselves for a no-till system. We'll typically do that incorporation. We have gotten to the point we've got it heated for a rotation, and we will typically do that incorporation process in a week, and it will typically involve about 2 cover crops in order to kind of get that system started. And I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, and we're still learning a lot on this thing, but that's how we're kind of basically, that's our step into a no-till system. We feel like those steps have to be in place to correct the imbalances that have been humanly placed on the soil to move forward in a positive direction.
Rodney.
Not sure how I'm going to add a lot to what these 3 guys have said, but absolutely agree with everything that was here. I agree with Mike. You got to start in the fall with the combine. You got to get that right. You got to spread even because that residue is going to be a killer for you going forward. We like to start no-till with an inline ripper running about 3 foot deep, every 50 to 100 foot wide, and we'll put a piece of tile in the bottom over there. Whether you're no-till or conventional, I think at the price of crops right now, everybody's starting to understand and see the benefits of that drainage. So, right now, today, be thinking about doing that, whether you're switching to no-till now or switching to no-till 5 years from now, it's going to start to build that structure, those water channels, and that movement that's going to be critical for no-till down the road. So, I absolutely encourage that. First thing we do on a new farm that's going into no-till is the first chance we can get in there and get soil samples and start looking at that, because we need to get the chemistry right. If we're going to try and build the structure, we got to make sure we got enough calcium there, sulfur to feed that biology and make the protein and all that. As we're trying to build these soils, there's a lot of chemically a shift that happens when you go into no-till. You've got to understand you're going to tie up some nitrogen initially when you're trying to build that organic matter in the soil and everything that happens there. You've got to understand what is going to happen over the next couple of years in your soil, and make sure that you do the amendments and the high calorie and gypsum, if that's what's needed, the fertilizer, everything you need to do to make it available for that crop and for the organisms in the soil going forward. So get that right. Get a cover crop in there so that it holds all that and starts to incorporate it for you while you're doing it, so that if you do the inline rip, if you have a compaction problem, going into this, we're not big on inline rippers anymore, but I certainly can see their place in the transition process. I don't think if you follow up afterwards, I don't think there's something you need to be using very often, but in that process of getting roots down through, getting your nutrients to move down in and do what you need to do to establish a structure. But the bottom line is to do everything you can do to move towards establishing that structure, those root channels, promoting the biology, having what it needs there is going to be key. Set up your equipment for no-till. Use the money that you get from selling the tillage equipment, because that's going to be one of the keys. Like Barry said earlier, just go ahead and get rid of it. Because you'll get 2 years into this and it won't look quite as good as the neighbors, and then you're going to be tempted to go back and just destroy what you've done in the first 2 years. So go ahead and sell that equipment. There's a good market for it right now. And take that money and put it into flotation tires, take it and put it into good planter attachments. Get yourself set up for success. You're not going to be successful if you're not committed. So, take the time to do that and commit yourself to success, and I think it'll work.
All right. While the microphone's there, and you mentioned you use cover crops to help get that biology going. I've got your slides loaded if you want to. I want to ask, we talked a little bit about cover crops and how do we get them incorporated into corn bean rotation, and is there a strategy? One cover crop follows another cash crop and before another cash crop. Tell us your basic cover crop strategy. In 10 words or less.
Okay, 10 words or less, make sure the planter is always running. That's what you really got to know, and I think drives you guys crazy a little bit sometimes, some other stuff in the fall. And I'm spending a lot of time in the planter these days, putting a lot of acres on the planter at this point. But I'm not sure what all we got here, but we'll through these a little bit. So many different ways to plant it, all the way from aerial to, spread on top and with fertilizer and air assisted systems like Mike's got, down to no-till drill that's set in the back of your shed, to precision planting with the planters. A lot of different ways to get it planted, but the key is to get it planted and to know what you're planting and what the limitations are on its growing season. We're shifting, all these things we're using for cover crops, we're using at times of the year they're not made to grow most of them. So we're taking things out of their ideal window and putting them into different time frames, sometimes even different temperate zones where they would naturally grow. So you need to understand that and match that up. Barry and the guys have worked together on some good planting tools and stuff like that that help you with identifying those windows. But we go by the calendar, try and make sure as soon as the count line's running, something's getting planted. And generally that something is going to match up to the dates on the calendar. We'll just go, your drilled grasses are super easy to get established all the way through the fall. So if you want to try something that's pretty easy to establish, you've got a drill, that's a good way to go, or even aerial apply with those. Throw in a mix with some radishes in the drill. You can blend those two right in the hopper, and it'll plant out good and even, and it's an easy way if you want to do some plots or do a couple fields. If you've got access to a drill, super easy. Gets you good growth, good diversity, really build some organic matter there. That goes back to the drainage issue. There is going to be, you still got to get the drainage, you got to get the other things right. Cover crops won't fix drainage if they die. And so if they stand in water and they die, they're not going to take care of getting those spaces you need, so you got to get that taken care of. You don't always get those great big radishes like Dave Brent, some of those guys show when you're planting behind corn, soybeans like most of us are going to be. They're a lot smaller at taproot. Still been able to dig that down 24, 30 inches on the fibrous roots on the tap, even when it only looks like you've got a little 6-inch carrot there or whatever. You're doing a lot of cycling, a lot more than it looks like just from the top. The number of fiber roots there that come off of that taproot and the worms just love it there. And so certainly a lot of things going on there. You can't. It's not if you find a worm when you dig it up, it's how many worms you're going to find, generally. Through those. Some different things here. Just lots of structure, lots of roots. That's all hopefully what you see when you dig a hole, the dirt just falls away and you got roots. And that's what we like to see if there's some moisture. We're seeing that so much this week. It's more like concrete. Trying to get to the equipment here. Manure application. I know there's some people in here dealing with liquid manure. We built this car several years ago. That is a hydraulic shank to allow you to adjust the pressure to get the shank to run truly vertical, depending on your soil conditions, with a Dietrich sweep on the bottom. Use a drag line with that for auto manure. We're running 300 to 400 acres of manure a year at this point with a system like that, and really, in the spring, usually you're going to have to hit it with maybe a harrow or something to smooth it down. Most of what we do in the fall, we're able to go back by spring and plant right into that some of the prettiest corn you can have. So that's what it looks like after that goes through. There's just not a lot of disturbance for that's 8,000 to 10,000 gallons that are put on there to the acre of mixed manure product. So pretty good. There's the planter picture I was looking for. That's one of the ways we've kept our costs down. And we take our beam planter, which is a central fill white beam planter, actually take every other row and put a little hopper that we just made up out of some Frecko style there. And a little plug in our link in there. Save another use for time. So we're with those little hoppers, they're about a foot tall, 10-inch tile, and if I fill that up and I put oats or cereal rye or Austrian peas, depending on what the timing of the year central hopper and use that on every other row, and then with that little hopper there on the rows with the radishes, and somehow I'll put clover in there. But I get about 250 acres on a fill, because you only put a couple pounds of the acre, about 1 3/4 to 2 pounds of radish to the acre when you're simulating it that way. And so we get 250 acres, so that'll, if I don't get out there until afternoon or evening or night, it'll keep you busy for a day, and you can get it filled back up when you have time or have help or whatever. So it's you get a lot of acres covered when you have time that way. You're not spending so much time filling out. So that's use the small sugar plate is the one that White designates that works for radish. 120 seeds per revolution on that. They have a wheat plate. Wheat plate works good for oats and for strawberry. So we use that for both of those. You got to do a little calibration. That does work. And corn planer set up. We're using the Martin floating ground cleaners. We did put a culvert back on this corn planer to help with moving just a little bit of dirt and cutting through some of the cover crop residues and things. Don't run it very deep. Not 100% sure if it's necessary, but it did help to part that residue and get some of the stones out of it. We got better luck with our openers this year with where that, when it was getting rid of the rocks and stuff out of the way. The pneumatic 2020 and all that we talked about. Drainage, just like we said, that's a drainage picture, but I think it makes the case of where you look at where that tile plow has gone through, and you look at the structure there that we're seeing. It's not coming up, big concrete chunks and those kind of things. Really good tilt to it, and just crumbles right back into the holes. Now, of course, in the compacted zones where you really need a tile, it's still going to be, you're going to have some blocky spots, but in general, the soil health, you can just see it there when you open it up. I don't like to do that very often, but having a drainage business affords you the opportunity to be in a hole a lot, which is a good way to keep an eye on what's going on with your soil. So, just an example of cover crops and the difference there. We had a test plot where we had some cover and then some non-cover. And this was not a field that had particularly a lot of slope, but it was just enough that the water came together and it came very nicely across the cover. Didn't move any soil. A little bit it did. It moved it 7 inches, and it was caught by the next row. And then you get into where it came off the edge of that there into the non-covered area, and really just a tremendous amount of dirt and nutrient movement. We're really trying to keep those where they belong on our farm. That is a spot where it was coming off of the original field into a cover and trapped a lot and back out. You just see where the cover traps it and where some of the conventional did cover and peas, all sorts of things.
You guys have got to spend some time with some of these guys individually to get that you can tell they've got a lot of information. Dave's going to have a presentation here in a little bit on cover crops, but real quickly I want to get these two guys real quick on cover crops and what you tried and wrap this up.
In 2010, that was my first foray into cover crops. I used Cisco's Nutribuilder blend. In 2010, it's not a good year to establish cover crops. Popcorn came off. We shelled it on the 1st of October, and I actually blended it. Mr. Deuce back there helped me out. We used crop oil, blended in with the fertilizer to try and get the cover crop seed to stick. And I spread it on 25-foot centers behind the spreader. Found out that the flight pattern of cover crop seed is very, very different. And I had nice strips of really nice grass and then nice strips of radishes, and the heavy stuff floated out and the light stuff stayed in the center. It did get established. I was shocked. Dave Robinson came up and we looked at it in the spring. We had radishes capped down 12 to 18 inches, and was pleased with that, but I didn't get enough to stifle my weeds. My mom's farm was in CRP for 10 years. And when it came out, we've no-tilled it ever since it was in CRP. I have a purple dead nettle infestation. Anybody out here have purple dead nettle in their fields? Yeah. It looks really pretty unless you own the field. I had 130 acres of lush green with purple flowers on top. So I went last year. I also used some cereal rye, spread just straight up with some AMS. I was spreading 100 pounds of AMS with 60 pounds of rye behind the cart, and working that in. I've used multiple types of vertical tillage. I've used Phillips rotary harrows. I like those in weak stalks. Popcorn, it was great. It didn't work so well for me, even in the sand with the heavy stalks. Last year, dumb luck, we had a good winter and I got lucky. 10th of November, we finished harvest and I spread 100 pounds of AMS with 60 pounds of rye and ran turbo chopper, Great Plains turbo chopper on a pretty hard, like 45-degree angle. The reason being, we shelled the corn with a John Deere, and Mike hit it on the head. A John Deere fluted roll corn head. Huge mistake from a harvest standpoint. The knife rolls are critical in getting the stalks sized to help yourself transitioning into cover crops. One of the reasons I plant twin rows, I have a 1224 Kinsey twin row planter. I have struggled in the past no-tilling corn on corn behind other planters. I do a lot of custom work for some guys. I found that if they don't plant real good, it's real hard for me to plant real good. But I found this year in no-tilling means that I'm able to plant into my own corn stalks a little better because I remember how I planted and I anticipate what I did and why I did it. I plan to leave my stalks upright this fall, and I will no-till corn back into those stalks next year with a rye. I prefer rye. I had real trouble. Normally I agree with Barry's assessment, picking your cover crop based on your previous crop and your anticipation for your next crop. Last year I aerial seeded ryegrass, straight ryegrass, into soybeans going to corn, but the dry weather, I had a real difficult situation getting cut through that sod and getting good seed to soil cutback. The rye, I had no problems with it. And my rye got a little rank. It was probably 18 inches tall when we killed it. It was still ropey when I planted it, but I was able to cut it and move it and handle it much better than I could in the ryegrass.
All right, Mike, real quick, I got your slides up here, but we're out of time, so there we go.
Okay, this machine kind of was developed with some ideas, and we put the ideas together, and like I said, I talked to Rodney a number of times, and I called him one evening, I think it was, and I said, okay, Rodney, we're going into cover crops. When is the best time to seed cover crops? And he said, late August. And his next comment was, I think I know where you're headed with this, and I like the idea, so we continued with it. But we've got a mower sprayer that we've used for several years, and we ended up putting a Gandy air box on it. This is a picture that my son took while we were out in the cornfield. We've got a 90-foot boom on here, so we're seeding. And you asked about the cover crops. Our intent is right now to be seeding cereal rye ahead of a soybean crop, and the nutrient blend, which is annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and radishes ahead of a corn crop. Now, sometimes that's going to be seeding into a corn crop or into a bean crop, depending on the rotation with the 2 years corn. But this machine Cam Mills and Rodney about is aerial seeding and getting some of that crop into the leaf angles of the corn plant, not necessarily getting it to the ground. So that's the reason we kind of went this direction. There's a picture sitting in the seat. You look like you're driving through a forest, and you are. So it takes a little nerve to do that, but that's kind of where we're at. We didn't get started with this till the 13th of September.